friends, it's Krista and you're watching Books and Jams. Thanks for stopping by my channel again today. I'm very excited to take a look at this year so far with a little mishmash of the mid-year book freak out tag, the mid-year check-in tag, and a question or two that I just added in there because I wanted to talk about a book or two that didn't fit any of the other questions. It's my channel. I can do what I want, right? So the first question is, how many books have I read so far this year? And that is 63, which I'm very excited about. I kind of in the back of my mind want to get to 100, but I put my Goodreads goal at 85. And I have no doubt that I should be able to get to 100 before the end of the year. But we'll see. Something might come up that keeps me from reading. As of right now, I should be doing okay. What genre have you read the most this year? And easily that is historical fiction. I always say that historical fiction is my favorite, and that shows clearly in the books that I've read this year. The best books that I've read so far this year, I'm gonna put 3 here, and I have a lot more than 3 that I could consider my favorites of the year so far, but the others I'm already answering other questions with them. These are 3 that didn't get mentioned in any other question, so I will answer them here. The first is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer and Annie Barrows. I read this in January and absolutely loved it. It is a rather lighthearted World War II historical fiction that takes place in England and the island of Guernsey, and we kind of learn about what Guernsey went through during World War II. But it is still very lighthearted. It's about this author who lives in England. She starts researching what happened on Guernsey, and she finds out about this book club that started during the war and why they started, and she starts communicating with some of the people who were a part of it and ends up traveling there. I absolutely loved this book. It's rather short, so this one I would very highly recommend. I also loved Echo by Pam Munoz-Ryan. She also wrote Esperanza Rising and other middle grade books. I read Echo during middle grade March. It's another historical fiction with a little mix of kind of fantasy, fairy tale-esque-ness to it. So there's this harmonica that we follow. So we kind of learn about the harmonica at the beginning with this little fairy tale type story. But then we follow 3 different children who come in contact with this harmonica and their stories. One of the characters comes from a Mexican migrant working family, but her neighbors are Japanese and were sent to a Japanese internment camp here in the West Coast. So the other character are 2 brothers who are in the foster system hoping to be adopted, and the third character is a little boy in Germany who is very musical and plays with his father and ends up leaving Germany. So heartbreaking, beautiful music is involved, which I love. I absolutely loved that book. And the third one that I will mention here is The War That Saved My Life. I don't have this one with me because I just let my cousin's daughter borrow it. It is another World War II historical fiction. I sense a pattern in these books. This one is about a little girl who is born with a club feet and her little brother, and her mother is awful, horrible. This takes place in London during the war when children were sent out to be raised during the bombing blitz of London. The mother was going to send just the son. The little girl can't walk. She's abused by her mother. She teaches herself how to walk on her clubbed feet and tries to escape with her brother. It just tells their story and the story of these children who leave London. Heartbreaking, beautiful. Yeah, I really loved all 3 of those, so I just wanted to mention them. Golly, I talked longer than I wanted to. The best sequel I've read so far in 2018 is gonna come up again in another question, but I am reading the Farseer trilogy right now. I just read these 2 in June. Assassin's Apprentice is the first one, and Royal Assassin is the sequel, and I believe this is the only sequel I've read this year other than I'm working through the Chronicles of Narnia, but I would say that this is my favorite sequel so far. I know this one a lot of people don't like as much in the trilogy. They find it to be a little slow, and while the beginning kind of felt slow, by the end I was 100% into it, and it did keep my interest all the way through, even though there were parts that weren't quite as fast-paced. So yeah, this is definitely my favorite sequel of the year so far. A new release that I haven't read yet but really want to, I think it was just released this month or last month, and it's Reaper, I want to say Reaper at the Gates by Sabaa Tahir. It's the 3rd one that follows An Ember in the Ashes and A Torch Against the Night. Definitely am very interested in that. I'm gonna wait and try to listen to it on audio since that's how I listened to the first 2, and I believe it's the same narrators coming up in the 3rd one. My biggest disappointment of the year. This book is a favorite of a lot of people, and I just did not like it. I was fully expecting to. It's Bridget Jones' Diary by Helen Fielding. I love Jane Austen inspired works, and this is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, but I could not stand Bridget Jones. Her personality, the way it was kind of like journal entry format, I just was so annoyed with it. I wanted it to be over. I did like the bits and pieces that were very much like Pride and Prejudice, but overall, I was very highly disappointed in that book because I really wanted to like it, and I thought I would. My biggest surprise of this year is definitely this Robin Hobb trilogy. First of all, they're chunker, so they're a little bit intimidating. Second of all, I don't read tons of fantasy, but when I was looking at my most read genre, I realized I read a lot more fantasy than I thought I did, but I like to read a lot of YA or children's fantasy or middle grade fantasy. I don't read very much adult fantasy. I'm discovering that I like it because I started Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson at the end of last year and need to continue it. And now I'm reading Robin Hobb, who's also an adult fantasy author, and I'm really enjoying these. So this was a big surprise and a delightful surprise for me this year. My favorite new author, I would say, is Katherine Applegate. I read 2 books by her during middle grade March. I read Wish Tree, which was just delightful. Also a very short, sweet story. It's about this tree who tries to connect the people in this neighborhood. I cried a couple different times in this book. It was just so lovely. So I also read by Katherine Applegate, The One and Only Ivan, which is a little bit more of a well-known middle grade book, and loved that. It's based on a true story of a gorilla who was raised basically in cages in this mall in the Midwest, I think. There was basically a zoo inside this mall, so you can tell like their cages were not very big. They were not cared for the way wild animals should be cared for, and it's just their story, and it was super sweet, and I loved Katherine Applegate's writing. So she is a favorite new author for sure. My favorite classic is a category that I added because I wanted to talk about The Secret Garden. This is such a beautiful story. I may have read it when I was really young, but I just could always remember the movie, and so I wanted to read the actual book, and I loved it. It was beautiful. I read it in the springtime. I read it in March, so it was almost like coming into spring, which was the most beautiful time because it's about this little girl who finds this secret garden and brings it back to life. Her parents and her lived in India. Her parents died because of this epidemic, cholera maybe. She's sent to live with a distant uncle who's distant in personality, like never at home because of his own grief. So this little girl is petulant and stubborn and not very fun to be around, but as this garden comes to life, she kind of comes to life as well. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. My favorite debut of the year would be Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I just read this with my Goodreads group in May and absolutely loved it. I know there are a handful of people who aren't connecting with it at all, but I loved the character of Eleanor. I found her to be humorous and awkward and socially inept in a lot of ways, but the friendship that she strikes up with a guy from her workplace and the things that she has to work through because of trauma in her childhood, there's just a lot packed into that story, and I really, really loved it. Book that made me cry this year, I think White Chrysanthemum by Mary Lynn Brocht was the book that I cried the hardest at. This is a World War II historical fiction, again, and this deals with a totally different side of the war. We are in Japan and Korea. 2 Korean sisters are swimming. One day, a Japanese soldier kidnapped the older of the 2 sisters, and we follow her story of being forced into becoming a comfort woman on the front lines of the Japanese army in Manchuria and all in the East Asian part of the war. We also follow the younger sister and her parents and find out what happened to them as well. It just was a heartbreaking, hard-hitting story, and I cried buckets. Whew, I cried buckets. A book that made me happy, though, was definitely The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which I also let my cousin's daughter borrow. This is by Kelly Barnhill, I think. This is such a lovely middle grade fantasy book with some dynamic and bright characters. Basically, this village every year sacrifices the newest born baby to this witch in the woods in order to protect themselves. The witch, on the other hand, wonders why these children are being left, rescues them, feeds them starlight, and brings them to another village to be adopted. One year, she accidentally feeds this little baby moonlight, which gives this baby some magic, and the witch ends up keeping this little girl and raising her herself. So it's the story of this village and these babies and the witch and a tiny dragon who thinks she's a gigantic dragon and a swamp monster. It's just such a fun and delightful read with some truths packed in there, and it just was wonderful. I loved it, loved it. The favorite video that I've made this year, easily, that is the interview that I did with my friend Joy's 2 daughters, Katie and Megan. This was towards the end of middle grade March, kind of as a way to wrap up the month. These girls blew me away with their answers. If you have not yet watched it, please do. I will link it up there. It was just fantastic. These girls were awesome, and it was such a fun video to make with them. What's been my bookish highlight of the year? And again, I'm gonna say middle grade March so far. Katie mentioned it on her video one day. I quickly said I would love to join in. We hosted middle grade March for the whole month of March across platforms, mostly Instagram and BookTube. Neither of us are that much on Twitter, but we had so much participation, and I read 29 books during the month. I tried to read a book a day, almost made it, which was just incredible. It's just a fun experience altogether. I absolutely loved it. Books that I need to read by the end of the year. I'm gonna pull this up. I've made a shelf here of all the books that I want to read by the end of 2018, and I'm making slow progress on it, but here are the ones that are still left. At the beginning of the year, I chose 10 categories and 5 books for each category to be included in my 2018 TBR shelf. I still have quite a bit left. I think what I'm gonna end up having to do is look at those categories and see if I've read other books from my shelves that match. Like this category here is YA books. I still have 4 on that pile, but I've read more than 5 YA books this year. Anyways, lots of books to read this year still from my TBR. And last question is, what's my next big priority for your reading? And I just started last night Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This is one of the most intimidating books on my TBR. It was one from my shelf that I want to read. I am going to be buddy reading that with Doris from Aldi Books, and everybody who has read it that watches my videos tells me how much they loved it. So I should not be intimidated by it, but there is still a little bit. It's getting easier to imagine liking it now that I've started, and I'm already captivated into the story. So I have a feeling I'm really gonna love it. We shall see. But that is it for the end of my mid-year chat, I'm gonna call it, I guess. But I hope you enjoyed this video and taking a look at the books that I've read so far this year and what I thought of them and my favorites and all that jazz. I would love to chat with you down in the comments below, like always. I would love to hear a book that made you cry this year so far, if you're a book crier, because I love to read books that make me cry. Give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends. Tell your neighbors. Just kidding. I'll talk to you soon with another video. Bye.